Hey everyone, welcome to episode 68 of That Gives Me Anxiety. Can't tell if I'm screaming. Jamie just got me these new headphones, but they're kind of like noise canceling, so I can't tell if I'm just absolutely yelling. Oh man, just as we thought spring was coming, it's here, but the weather this weekend was kind of, it was more of a stay inside and get things done kind of weekend, you know? Gathered my stuff for taxes, wedding planning. Though it is also tricky, like when, we work from home and when we have a weekend like that where we don't really get out of the house too much, sort of feel like the walls are closing in, right? Yeah, I think it's important while being someone that works from home to like get out and go places and do things, even if you can do it for like a little bit, right? Just good for your mental health. I mean, we all had 2 years of being stuck inside. But yeah, I'm liking these headphones and they're definitely taking a little bit of getting used to. I'm used to being able to like hear myself. But anyway, I've got a great episode lined up. We're going to be talking about striking a work-life balance, which is tricky, right? There's so many different things you got to do. You want to go get your dreams. Get your dreams. Yeah, you want to build the life that you want. You got to drink water, 8 hours of sleep, exercise, call your mom, on and on and on. You can overload yourself pretty easily. So to talk about striking a work-life balance, I have Adam Baruh, who's CEO of Podtask, Eiq Media, and SuiteCentric. Also a father of 4, and has a new puppy. His kids range from out of college to his youngest is a little guy, right? Like 4 or so. It just requires different hats, right? It just puts more on the plate. Not to mention having 3 different businesses and a podcast of his own. It's a lot. It's a lot. But before we start chatting with Adam, I want to remind you, if you're liking the show, to please remember to rate and review it. 5 stars wherever you're listening. You can check the show out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. YouTube is where you can check out my new headphones. I know, what a draw, right? Then there's my partnership with Pure Spectrum CBD. Offer a ton of different products, and they're offering the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off your orders. And if you're liking the show and you want to make a donation, you can do that through the Buy Me a Coffee link, which is in the description as well. Well, all right. I think this is an extremely important topic that we could all do a little bit better at, right? It's just one of those things. I don't know about you, but I'm constantly being mindful of the balance, and it's a push-pull between wanting to get things done, but also taking care of yourself. So yeah, thank you so much to Adam, and thank you for listening. Joining me now on the podcast, I have Adam Baruh, who is the CEO of SuiteCentric. Adam, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, so we connected mutually checking out each other's podcasts, and so we're going to be talking about your podcast and everything that you do and how you manage your work-life balance. And I mean, that's such a tricky thing to do. But first, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Okay, yeah. Hey, everybody. As Patrick said, I'm Adam Baruh, CEO of SuiteCentric, which is one of the 3 roles that I have. Also the CEO of Eiq Media, through which I host my own podcast called The Change, which focuses on servant leaders working to normalize the mental health conversation and increase empathy in business. So that's the focus of that podcast. And also through Eiq Media, I produce a podcast called How I Made It Through, which is about to start season 2. It's hosted by my business coach, Kristen Taylor. And she talks with people who've had like near-death experiences, spiritually transformative experiences. So it's really cool work. It's something that she's really passionate about. Season 1, we were able to interview a little bit kind of a different topic for her, but we were able to interview some really cool people, some celebrities like Cam Ayala, who was on The Bachelorette. Also Dave Dravecky, who is a former pitcher, Major League Baseball pitcher for the San Francisco Giants and the San Diego Padres, who lost his arm to cancer, which obviously ended his career. So the third thing that I do, which is a newer thing, is I'm actually launching a CRM and workflow management solution, like CRM and workflow management solution for podcasters. That's called Podtask, and hoping to launch it around November 1st. So,
Oh, that's soon.
Yeah, quite busy. I don't know how I keep everything in line, but right now I'm working a lot of hours, and that's not super sustainable over the long term. So eventually stuff hopefully will kind of balance out. But yeah, right now it's talk about work-life balance. It's definitely not. It's definitely tipping in the scale more to the work end of that, the life end of that.
Well, how have things sort of ballooned outwards? Is it that you just like the challenge, or a lot of people place a lot of their value, quote unquote, wrongfully in their job? Is that something that you're trying to do? Or just tell me a little bit about how your work keeps expanding.
So it's a really good question, and it's a really important topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. So that's definitely something I'm really mindful of. I spend time looking within. It's like, what drives me towards this? Why am I a serial entrepreneur? I mean, that's how I would really describe myself. It's not coming from a place of feeling valued based on what I do and produce. That's really not where it's at. Although definitely the work I do through Eiq Media does give me value, because that's speaking with people like yourself and people that I have as guests on my podcast, exploring, the mental health conversation, trying to normalize it, looking at the Great Resignation, looking at empathy in business and today's kind of business landscape. So that is a place of passion. That is really where my heart is. And so, I do that. I don't earn any money from that yet. I hope to be able to do that at some point soon. We're actually coming up on the 1-year anniversary since I released my first episode. So, you could probably attest to this, but it takes a little while to make money from that. So I'm not making any money from EIQ. It's really just purely a place of passion. I'll talk about Podtask for a second, because that is also a place of passion for me. I am, a software developer by trade. So I really enjoy the problem solving and the creative element of software development. But Podtask came about really in a haphazard way. I had no intention of productizing a CRM workflow management application for podcasters, right? What I was doing was, okay, so here's the connection to SuiteCentric. In my role as SuiteCentric, we are a NetSuite solution provider and reseller and implementer. NetSuite is an online ERP system, CRM, Salesforce automation, inventory management. It does all that stuff. So about a year ago, I actually bought a NetSuite account for Eiq Media, to kind of manage all the financials and have our own CRM where we could like manage where we're at with our episode production. Because we have a team of people. It's like myself, my assistant who does a lot of stuff for me. I have a sound engineer. I have a marketing team. And so there's a lot of moving pieces. So I had all that stuff in NetSuite. I was actually, for Eiq Media, I paid about a little over $10,000 for that account over the last year. And, because like I mentioned, I'm not really making any money from that. When the contract came up after a year, I was like, I'd rather save the 10K and just build my own CRM based on what I need. Right. And then for my accounting, which I was doing in NetSuite, I just moved that onto some kind of like inexpensive platform. And so anyway, I built this really just for the mindset of using it internally, just for myself and my assistant and my team. And then, I got that live and we've been using it. And then I was thinking, you know what? I mean, all I need to do is put a couple more features in here and I can actually sell this thing. Right. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Like I said, I'm fairly close to being in the end of development here. But the funny thing is now that I've productized that, I'm like, well, I need to get back on that NetSuite account because I'm going to need some system for like billing and credit cards. So it's funny because like I did the whole thing to save $10,000 and now I'm staying on NetSuite. But so like Podtask kind of spun out of this trying to save money thing. And anyway, so that's kind of the thread of my life. In addition to, I am a father of 4. My wife is pretty sick today. So I actually have my almost 3-year-old sitting over here in the main part of my office. So that's where the work-life stuff comes into play. I mean, I still have to work and, what can you do? My kid doesn't have daycare today. So,
well, that's the other, half of the equation. I was going to ask you about your family life. How old are the 4 kids?
Yeah. So the two older ones, they don't require much anymore because they're 23 and 20. You know,
Okay.
my oldest actually just graduated from University of San Francisco with a nursing degree.
Nice.
And then got a great job up at one of the hospitals up in the Bay Area. So she's now making money. So
That's great.
check that box.
Yeah.
And then my 20-year-old is a computer science student at the University of California, San Diego. So he's super busy with his own life. And then I have two younger kids, which came out of, I got remarried. So my younger two are 7 and my little guy's almost 3. So, and I'm almost 50. So it's like, kind of at this stage of my life, going back to still having a kid in diapers, it's definitely interesting compared to when my older two were this age. I mean, my life was completely different, totally different world. I do find that one thing that I try to always remind myself and be better about is I find that I don't today have the patience like I did when, my older kids were this age. There's just so much more going on in my life. Obviously, I mentioned all the work stuff, but so yeah, kind of keeping everything in line. Plus here's the kicker. We recently adopted a puppy Australian cattle dog.
Oh man.
So I don't know if you know about this breed of dog, but she's awesome. We love her to pieces, but she requires so much attention. And I mean, we have to bring her to the park twice a day just to get her energy level kind of like at a place where she's not crazy in the house. So I don't know what's more difficult, managing the kids or managing the dog right now.
Puppies are tough. I adopted a dog a couple of years ago, and I mean, you don't regret it for a second. I was still living in Brooklyn, and it is just constant, like, don't chew that. Like, it's just, they have unending energy and they don't know where to go to the bathroom. And it's
my dog's thing, with the cattle dog, this breed, they're so kind of tailored or evolved for working. They want tasks. They want to keep their minds busy. And so they get obsessive with things like tennis balls and stuff like that. So if I don't run her twice a day, we get to the evening and she will literally keep bringing her tennis ball and dropping it in front of me and then bark at me if I don't throw it for her. So yeah, they're intense, but she's awesome. So, we love her.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to ask you about, you were talking about patience level. I mean, a 3-year-old requires a lot of patience, but, you're split between that and, 20-year-olds are still very young, right? I don't know your kid, and, 20-year-olds can run the spectrum of how much attention they need from their parents to help them and support them. But how do you handle, I mean, things are going to hit the fan, right? With kids, it's just expect the unexpected, as much as possible. Mentally, how do you prepare because it's coming? So yeah, I'm curious about how you handle that.
I mean, the older two, they're amazing. I mean, they always got straight A's in school. They're really mature.
So they weren't me when I was their age.
Or me. I mean, I definitely didn't get my stuff together until my late 40s, probably. But I probably should. I want to give them more attention and kind of give them more of my time. But at least the way that I look at it, it's like they don't require that so much. I mean, the 7-year-old, she's, easier for sure. But the 3-year-old, and he's got a peanut allergy, and he's, he's had some nervous system stuff because he had a little bit of a traumatic experience when he was 2 months old. He was really sick and had to bring him to the hospital in the middle of the night. They did a spinal tap. They did all this stuff with him. So, my wife and I can actually see that there's kind of like some artifacts of that experience that we still kind of work through with him. He's amazing. He's awesome. Everybody that meets him loves him, but he doesn't sleep. Of my 4 kids, like this little guy, they were all great sleepers, I feel like, but this little guy, it's like he doesn't need sleep. He's hard to get to bed. He doesn't do it so much anymore, but he would get up. He used to get up like when he was maybe sick, up until maybe 18 months. I mean, he was getting up like 4 or 5 times a night and then getting up at like sometimes 5 a.m. And that's the start of his day.
Oh my goodness.
So everything I mentioned before, also balance that with the fact that I probably myself average about 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night. But
And you feel good with that?
no, I operate okay. And that's not a good thing. I'm not saying I'm not like wearing it as a badge of honor. I do okay, but I definitely suffer from that. Like I've dealt in my life with nervous tics. I still have it a little bit, although it's gotten better. But really the worst of it, and this is something I speak about a lot on my podcast and when I go on to other podcasts, the worst of it was, leading up to the pandemic. I mean, here I am, I'm running SuiteCentric, this company I've got, at that time, I think we had 20, 25 employees. And, what was that? This was actually something I'm about to talk to you about actually started maybe about 6 months to a year before the pandemic. I started getting these really bad anxiety attacks. I had never had them before in my life, except for one time, which was right after 9/11. I actually had to be in New York for a job for 2.5 weeks. Anyway, I won't go into that story, but so I never really had a panic attack since then up until, this time a couple of years ago. And I mean, even right now, looking back, I don't exactly know what propelled it, like what started it occurring. I mean, probably the lack of sleep, probably how much I was working and how much I was carrying and the responsibility of a payroll of 25 people, 25 very expensive people, given the work we do. I have highly paid employees. So, for anybody who's ever had a panic attack, I mean, they're the absolute worst. I mean, I really, where it would occur was trying to go to sleep. Probably sleep was the catapult of it, or the catalyst of it, because I wasn't getting much sleep. And if I finally, when I went to lay down to go to bed, if I didn't fall asleep right away, I would get this panic attack thinking I'm going to be up all night.
Yeah. And then I'm going to feel terrible in the morning and I'm not going to be able to get things done. And then I'm going to let my employees down further. Yeah. It just spirals.
But it was really bad. I mean, then it was happening multiple times a day. There was a claustrophobia element that was triggering it too, where one time I went to a client's office up in LA and I had a meeting with this one guy. We just had like a 1-hour meeting to go over some stuff. And he set us up in this, I mean, it was a gigantic conference room. You could have put 150 people in there, but it was just me and him in there. But it was an interior conference room with no windows, and the panic attack set in, in this claustrophobia. I had to excuse myself from the meeting several times just to get myself together. And so top of that, then I started working about 70 hours a week on the project. This is about when the pandemic began. This is when the panic attacks were coming several times a day. I was working about 70 to 80 hours a week on this project. I felt this responsibility for my team. I didn't want to have to lay anybody off. I kind of carried that responsibility of maintaining everybody's livelihood that worked for me. And then, like I was talking about before, my little guy was getting up 5 or 6 times a night. And on this particular project I was on at that time, I had a lot of working late nights. We had a development team we were working with out of India. And so the best time for us to get on the phone and go through stuff with them was about 10 o'clock p.m. my time, Pacific time. So I'd work till about from, all day, and then do the whole kid thing. 5 o'clock, I'd shut down, do the whole family thing, get the kids to bed. 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I'm back on my computer till about 1 a.m. And because I was already up, I said to my wife, I'm like, you get your sleep. I'm already up. I'll just, when our little guy gets up, I'll get him back to bed. And so at that time, I was averaging maybe 3 hours of sleep a night.
Oh my gosh.
Disjointed. I mean, I get 45 minutes. The kid would wake up. I'd get him back to bed. Another 45 minutes. So that's when I was having numerous panic attacks all day. And ultimately, I mean, I've explored that. I know exactly where that all comes from, and I'm happy to talk about that. But I did hire a business coach, Kristen Taylor, who's fantastic. And, she's also trained as a therapist. So we really kind of spent a lot of time exploring kind of where all of this was coming from. And, I've identified it, and it's a work in progress, but I think I've got the majority of it under wraps now.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Can we talk? I know you've got a lot on your plate. You've got work, you've got friends, you've got family, pets. You've got the people that you make small talk with at the coffee shop or gym. You've got that bird that you see when you wake up every morning outside your window. that you've projected things onto. Look at that bird. Doesn't even love its family. It's always by itself. You do that. Everyone does that. Point is, you've got a lot on your plate. Well, that's why there's Instacart, to take a little bit off your plate. Using Instacart, you search for all your favorite foods and things that you need from the grocery store, all online, all while you're looking at that bird, wondering why it hasn't called its mom. And they deliver it to you. They go to the store and do the shopping for you. And they can deliver it in as fast as an hour. And you can sign up by clicking the link in the description, wherever you're listening or watching. And that's a great way of supporting the show. So it's a great way of supporting this show. It's a great way to make your life a little bit easier, because we all know that you have so much going on, like wondering whether that bird judges you back.
I'm curious. I mean, I want to say that if it is uncomfortable, like push back on it, but where does it come from?
It's not uncomfortable for me to talk about. It was before, but I mean, I've already opened up on other podcasts about kind of what that experience came from. So where that came from was when I was 6 years old, my parents had recently gotten divorced. Mm-hmm. My mom would want to go out. And so she had hired this babysitter, this teenage kid that worked at my dad's liquor store that my dad worked at. And so this kid would come over and my mom would leave. Immediately, this babysitter would lock me in my mom's closet, shut the lights off, lock me in there, barricade the door, and for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, he'd invite his friends over and they'd be partying and doing drugs, doing pretty hardcore things like heroin. I remember finally when they would let me out, coming out and seeing people passed out with needles, rubber hoses around their arms, as a 6-year-old, right? I mean, just being locked in with the light off, terrifying. I mean, that 100% is where the claustrophobia came from. Mm-hmm. But really, where the core of a lot of my issues throughout my life have come from was, looking back, my memory, I think this really happened one time, but this babysitter had his friends over, and when they let me out of the closet one time, they molested me. So, that was something that, looking back, I knew it was something bad. And so as a 6-year-old, I think what happened was my nervous system kind of built this story that I think what happened was for me to have agency over what happened to avoid this kind of out of control feeling. Mm-hmm. And this is all not conscious. I was a 6-year-old.
Right.
I think I'm thinking this is what happened was I blamed myself. I thought I caused it. I thought it was my fault. And I thought there was something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. So,
I mean, that's heavy baggage, right? My goodness.
Yeah. And so what happened was, I mean, where this all kind of came together for me and where I kind of connected all the dots was, so I mentioned Kristen, my coach. Mm-hmm. I think this was maybe our second or third session together. I had brought up about my divorce and my older kids and feeling a lot of kind of guilt over, stuff that they were still going through, which I was kind of laying the blame on myself and having them deal with the divorce, mm-hmm. Parents and stuff like that. So I was exploring this topic of guilt and how I felt with Kristen. And all good coaches, they don't ever tell you what to do. They just ask really good questions that make you think, right? Mm-hmm. So she posed a question to me that changed my life. She said, well, let's explore that, Adam. Like, do you think you feel guilt or do you think you feel shame? And I said, I don't really know what the difference is. Like, explain to me what the difference is. And I think, paraphrasing her, I think she said something to the effect of like, shame is something that belief systems and identities are built off of, mm-hmm. versus guilt is something that you feel terrible about, but it doesn't alter your identity, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was that. We wrapped up our meeting. I went about the rest of my day, went home later on, did the whole thing with the family, got the kids to bed, and it was a Friday night. So it's usually kind of when I will turn on a show or something. And so I was watching the show and kind of turned it off at about midnight. Everybody's asleep in the house but me. And as soon as I turned off the TV, I just kind of remembered that conversation from earlier in the day. guilt versus shame, like guilt versus shame. Like, is there something I feel shameful about in my life?
Mm-hmm.
And literally, like like a truck hit me, or like the parting of the sea, I went right to that moment when I was molested. And I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I have felt shameful for that my entire life. I've never, I never even, so I never blocked out that memory. I knew it happened, but I did feel well adjusted in my life. Looking
Mm-hmm.
back now at almost 50 years old, I know better. I think I was fairly well adjusted, but there was still this shameful identity that had been created from that experience at 6 years old that I had never really dealt with. What it culminated in was my whole life, this negative self-talk that's been kind of underlying the scenes, this nervous tick. I can attribute 100% to that. Later on, kind of when I got divorced and drug use, alcoholism, things in my life that I was doing that, oh my God, of course, I was numbing myself out for feeling this shame from that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So literally the wisdom of my higher self was revealed in that Friday night in the matter of a minute after turning off that television show. It's the most bizarre thing. Looking back, it's really bizarre how it all worked, how it all kind of revealed itself, but it had
Yeah.
been hidden there for 49 years, right?
My goodness.
So anyway, I mean, this was now, I think when I had this revelation, it was almost a year and a half ago now. So there's been a lot that I've been unlayering within myself and working on and practicing mindfulness and doing things to really be attuned to this negative self-talk, be attuned to this shamefulness.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'll turn it back to you in a second, but here's what I've discovered. The number one healing mechanism for me all comes down to self-love and
Mm-hmm.
self-nurturing, and really catching myself in those times where I find myself going down a negative or a dark place. Like, okay, hold on a second. This kind of thought process is happening again. Let's try to identify why, where it's coming from. But then, you know what? It's totally, Adam, you're doing the best you can,
Mm-hmm.
built a pretty amazing life. I feel like people that work for me, I mean, they all kind of respect me, and I think I have kind of a good reputation. So focus on that. And so that it's been it's been pretty magical how really this is all unfolded. But
That's
weird
awesome.
how in the first 48, 49 years, I had just kind of lived without this knowledge of how that experience at 6 years old
Yeah.
shaped so much of my life without really knowing it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, yeah. I mean, my initial reaction is just that I'm so happy for you because, you know, I, I I've had a similar experience, so I know what you mean when you're saying like you had this like feeling that you only kind of were able to be aware of it once you move past it. Right. When I started taking my mental health seriously, similar experiences with anxiety and depression. And I just built this like, I built my whole life on just like dealing with this thing that you're not even like conscious that you're dealing with. I only recognize it now that I've done things to help myself. And so, you know, I just think that like, it just shows that like everybody should be doing something for their mental health, at least getting someone to help them ask the right questions of themselves, because whether there was something truly traumatic or you're just trying to manage life, you need to see the tools, like you were saying. You need to have the tools to recognize when you're going down like a self-destructive path. And gosh, man, I'm so much happier now that I have those in place. And you certainly seem like you're in a good place.
Well, I mean, the other part of this too that I think is, people say this all the time, but it's hard to really kind of really feel it. But gratitude is so important to your own well-being, right? Look for the things that you're grateful for, because there are always going to be things that you're grateful for, even if it's trivial things. Like, there's always something to look at and be grateful for. And, some of the things I'm grateful for, is number one, living in a time in history where mental health conversations are starting to be recognized as, hey, important and worthy of talking about. And look, we all suffer from stuff. I'm going to say something right now. It kind of is a controversial statement, but I think you'll see the light and the point of what I'm trying to make here. But I'm really grateful for the pandemic. Okay. I do not wish that there had been any sickness or death, people losing their jobs. Obviously, that's terrible, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I'm grateful that the pandemic occurred. And the reason for that is it really brought to the surface people's mental health issues. And I think can make us all look at each other and have empathy for each other, because we all went through some shared trauma, right? And so, you talk to many people, they're all going to say the same thing. The pandemic really was a catalyst for flushing a lot of this out. And if you look at popular culture right now, shows like Ted Lasso, where the whole season 2 was really focused on mental health, I'm blown away, and I'm so grateful that the writers of that show decided to talk about that in a really popular show in a really interesting way. So athletes like Simone Biles, and there's numerous others, celebrities talking about their own mental health. I mean, I'm really grateful that we live in a time where people are starting to recognize that, you know what, it's okay to talk about what we deal with and what we go through and what's painful, because it's really striking to me how up until the pandemic, really mental health was something that, when you spoke about it, it was like, oh God, what's wrong with that?
Oh, don't talk about that. Yeah. Yeah. It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and so why though? We all suffer from stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all the time. I mean, it's like,
It was a weakness, right? To the generations before us. Like, how dare you show weakness?
Yeah. And anyway, so I mean, really where I'm, where my podcast and EIQ Media and all this work I'm doing right now, it's part of what another thing I dealt with as a CEO of SuiteCentric. We're about to celebrate our 6-year anniversary, but something that I dealt with strongly for the first 3.5, 4 years was imposter syndrome, because like I said, I'm a software developer by trade. I was a wedding photographer for 10 years. My college degree is in environmental studies. I was a park ranger. I've done a number of different things. I'm not your typical CEO, right? And I kind of felt for the first 3.5, 4 years of running this company that I did feel like an imposter. I felt like I had to be this type of CEO, this invulnerable, strong, charismatic person. I really struggled with that because that's not who I was. And so when all this stuff started to come out within me, and I started to explore this, and I started to explore this imposter syndrome also that I felt, which was all part of this shame and everything, coming out of that experience when I was 6. I was like, you know what? I actually have a platform as a CEO to, in my role as a leader, to do something positive with that, right? And I had already kind of recognized at that point that my empathy was my number one superpower, which interestingly, I had built a belief system that was my biggest weakness and character flaw.
Oh man, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Entire life. Well, I work in a very aggressive, competitive industry, the tech industry, right? And there's a lot of ego, and so you gotta be very assertive, and you gotta appear strong to people, because if you're not, you're gonna get hammered. And so, yeah, I don't know why. Looking back, I'm like, I mean, I guess maybe just kind of dealing with the ego and other people's how they were with their kind of aggression in this industry. I had just kind of built this belief system that my sensitivity and my empathy was kind of a weakness. I don't know why, but thank God that I kind of called that out, and now I know it's my number one superpower. So I've been very, very focused on the leading with empathy messages that are out there. And then, what I could be doing at SuiteCentric to better the lives of my team, because in the IT consulting industry, it's very notorious for burnout, anxiety, people working long hours, giving up nights, weekends, holidays. I mean, that was my career basically. And, I kind of decided I'm not going to do that for myself, number one, and definitely for my team, I'm not going to do that. So, we're very much focused on this work-life balance, harmony, whatever you want to call it, but just I started by putting, the statement out there to my team, like, look, nobody here needs to work more than 40 hours. If you want to do it for your own, if you like doing what you do, you just want to, feel you want to keep up and that's what you need to do. Like, that's your call. But I want to make sure you guys know from our perspective, from our management team, we don't expect you guys to work more than 40 hours.
That's
we don't
great.
expect you guys to work at nights.
Yeah.
If a customer tries to reach out on a weekend, something's like, look, we have an SLA, so software that we support, there is a escalation. So if something goes down over the weekend, we have a process for it, but don't feel like you need to take it on yourself over the weekend and give up your weekend, right? So that's just one of the things that we do to try to practice empathy in business. But, I think those things are important. I think that's, you look at the Great Resignation, that's what the workforce is expecting now. They're expecting empathy.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
they're expecting a work-life balance because people when the pandemic hit, everybody wanted to hit the road and buy Sprinter vans and go work out of their vans or whatever. And I think that's awesome. So why not support that, if we can.
I love that.
We live in a remote world. So
yeah, my job is in New Jersey and I live in South Carolina. So yeah.
One of life's mysteries is that birthdays always find me unprepared, catch me unprepared. I don't go on Facebook as much, so I don't notice them as much. But I want to express my love and appreciation for friends and family. That wasn't part of the copy, I'm just saying it. Year after year, month after month. Even when I see it coming, I'm not ready. Am I a jerk? Yes and no. Why do things have to be so black and white for you? But I've got great news, friends. Introducing monthly card subscriptions from the Cardist studio. Join the service that delivers the card and the stamp that you'll need to your door. No more errands. Who wants more errands? I don't know why, but I'm starting to think of errands as a kid's name. Errands, go back to bed. Okay, but here's how it works. You choose your categories, from birthdays and celebrations to love and encouragement, or select their full collections and have those thank you notes and just because cards at the ready. Those ones are always so nice. Like when you get a card for doing something and it's just like a small little heads up or token of appreciation, it genuinely makes you feel really good. And best of all, you would never get caught cardless again. Let me repeat, you'll never get caught cardless again. Try to say that a bunch of times in a row. You'll never get caught cardless again. Monthly card subscriptions from as little as $8 per month for the card and the stamp. Delivered to you. TheCardistStudio.com shop subscriptions. And you can use the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off your originating order.
I'm curious, you were describing how you're not sleeping, right? You're working 70, 80 hours. How did you implement, or maybe you didn't, how have you begun to improve your sleep while managing everything that you do and want to do?
So, right now I'm kind of like not in a good phase with that, but I'm okay with it because at least I'm mindful to it. Because I have a mission right now. I'm trying to get Podtask launched, and that's kind of something I have to do outside of business hours so that during the day I can take care of my clients, right? So it's purposeful, and I do still try to have better sleep, but some things that do keep me balanced. I read a lot. I get a lot of enjoyment out of reading, and so I make sure to carve out time when I can during my lunch breaks. Like I used to always work during my lunch breaks. I still do a lot of the time, but I try as often as I can to go. There's a nice park up the road from my office here. And I'll take my Kindle during my lunch break and go read. And so if I'm sacrificing sleep, at least I got to make sure I'm eating okay. I'm not like eating terrible foods. I'm kind of maintaining my health, trying to work out. Not as much as I want to, but probably I'm averaging right now, I would say once a week at least, getting into the gym. Want to do that a little bit more, but I'll rewind a little bit. When I started doing this work with Kristen and, starting to really do a lot of work to get my life in balance and to get my life headed in the direction that I wanted it to go in. I was a lot better about it. I would go to sleep at about 9 o'clock,
Mhm.
try to get the 8 hours for sure. And I would not watch TV anymore. I was watching a lot of shows and binging and stuff like that, keeping me up late at night. And so I kind of
Mhm.
shut that down. And then also journaling. I don't do it really as much today as I want to, but I think for the first 6 months after that kind of initial revelation that I had, I was doing that pretty routinely every night and then going to bed about 9, getting up and just making sure that my workday was balanced with like I said, like reading,
Mhm.
taking breaks, eating well, not eating crap foods and stuff like that. So
Yeah, carving out ways to take care of yourself, right? It's not just sleep, and the routine changes, right? It seems like you went through a phase where you were sleeping a little bit more routine, but you have this other goal now. So it's just I sort of reiterate just to suggest to people that there's not just one routine, right? And life is not always going to fit into one box, and so having a few different things that can help you ease whatever stage of life you're in at the point at whatever point you're at.
yeah, and I'll add really having self-awareness. I mean, that's probably the number one thing that's come out of all of this work that I've done is a really increased level of self-awareness. So I don't let myself kind of spiral out of control because I think I have a greater self-awareness now where it's like, when I kind of see myself going in a direction, I can kind of catch myself and like, all right, what's going on right now? Am I doing what I'm doing to, based on, like you said at the beginning of this episode, am I trying to produce value to feel good with it? Or
Mhm.
am I doing something that actually, is important that like this podcast work, I think it's important and hopefully be able to turn it into a pretty viable business. And so,
Mhm.
I'm at least aware of what's driving me right now. Like
Mhm.
where am I at? Am I, even though I'm kind of on the scale where I'm not sleeping well, like, okay, well, that's because I'm doing something that's actually, I kind of want to put out in the world so that I can have this business that is a good sustainable business, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, so we live in a world where profits drive a lot of well, basically everything, right? The way corporations are running, and we constantly need to improve our bottom lines. How do you think, or do you think that this trend of empathy in business will continue, or do you see it reverting back to where it was?
I don't see it reverting back, and thank God for the millennials and the Gen Zers because I think they're not going to let it go back. We haven't really seen those generations really get to a level of leadership, if you will. I mean, there's still a lot of Gen Xers like myself, or even boomers and people from previous generations that are in leadership business or leadership positions. So, we're still seeing kind of, this transition into this new kind of empathetic leadership and business kind of world. But when we do see now a lot of the millennials and the Gen Zers more predominantly be in these leadership positions, not just in business, but in government as well. I mean, I really have a lot of hope for the future. I'm so happy that they've identified the importance of self. And I don't think it's selfish. And one thing I do want to say is I think, and I've done this in my own management a few years ago where it was kind of common for people to bash millennials and talk about this
Mhm.
sense of entitlement that is seemingly was there, right? But now that I've kind of explored that a little bit more, I just think that what drives these younger generations isn't coming from a place of entitlement. I honestly think they do want to change the world, and they just have a shorter leash and shorter amount of patience for wanting to get that done. So
Yep.
as much as I can kind of support this transition into this kind of new empathetic world, I do think it's here to stay.
Oh man, I hope so. It'll lead to a much better world. I'm
Certainly.
curious about your search in finding your business coach who's also trained in therapy. Was that the
Yeah.
first person you worked with? And how did you know she was the right person? I'm just curious about what that whole process was like.
Well, I got lucky. Absolutely. I don't know how it is for you on LinkedIn and whatnot, but because I'm a CEO on LinkedIn, I mean, I get solicited from people wanting to be my coach daily.
Hmm.
And I always ignored that stuff. Right. But, I knew kind of coming out of these 70 to 80-hour work weeks, 3 hours of disjointed sleep, the numerous panic attacks I was having every day, I knew I needed to do something different and actually start to get in front of this.
Hmm.
And I think almost right when I had that thought, I'm a big believer in manifestation. So I do think that I kind of like called Kristen into my life unconsciously, but I manifested her. So, I remember showing up to work one morning and this notification came up on LinkedIn, Kristen Taylor Consulting. It looked interesting. I looked at her profile. I'm like, that's kind of what I need. I mean, she seems pretty cool. She seems to know her stuff. And so she reached out, or I reached out to her. We had a couple back and forths. And then finally, I think it took about a month of just kind of back and forth to finally get time to start working together. But yeah, I really lucked out with finding her. But again, I really think I manifested that. And we don't have a coaching relationship anymore because we've become really good friends. Really one of my dear friends, and I love her to pieces. And once I started hosting my own podcast and I created EIQ, I kind of talked her into how I made it through, which is her podcast. I said, you should podcast. And so we don't have this coaching relationship anymore. We have a friend relationship and a working relationship because I produce her podcast. So we meet every week. And if there's stuff I want to talk about on a personal level, like, we meet weekly just to talk about her podcast stuff, but I'll bring up stuff and she's shared stuff with me as well. So, I really think we've built a strong friendship out of that.
That's great. Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. It's just right place, right time, and right person.
Yeah. But again, it's the power of manifestation. I had put myself in the position of kind of entrusting my higher self out there in the universe, and the universe rewarded me with Kristen. And I kind of look at Podtask as the same thing. It's like it's been a little bit of a rough year at SuiteCentric, and like I mentioned at the beginning of the show here, it's like Podtask kind of came out of just trying to save money. And so, I definitely encourage your audience to, explore manifestation, explore this connection to spirit and higher self, because it really, I've seen it, reward me and people around me so many times that there is absolute magic there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, our brains are so suggestible too, where, if you start thinking down a path, yeah, I agree. There's just something else going on, right? That you can convince yourself or build confidence, right? There's so many different ways that manifesting can help you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I just wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to add about striking a work-life balance, empathy, one of your businesses, or really anything.
Again, it really comes down to just practicing the self-awareness. I mean, for anybody who's listening in here today that maybe has gone through anxiety issues or, dealing with shame and stuff like that, it's never too late. I mean, here I am almost 50. It's never too late to explore
Definitely.
that. Explore that and reward yourself and nurture yourself by giving yourself the time and the opportunity to do what your soul needs, do what your higher self needs. So if anybody wants to reach out to me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. You can easily find me and send me a message, and I'd be happy to talk about my experience and see how I can help with anybody who wants to reach out.
Awesome. Is there any other social media channels that you want to mention, or is LinkedIn the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn's pretty much the best way, but
Okay.
I'm on Instagram and all this stuff. I don't really tweet too often, but yeah, LinkedIn's definitely going to be the number one place.
Awesome. Well, such a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate your openness and your honesty. I mean, hearing stories like yours is exactly why I started this podcast. There's so much power in hearing that. So thank you so
100%.
much.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah.
Oh man, thank you so much, Adam. it must be, I mean, you seem, I offered to have him not, as with all guests, I don't try to push anyone past a certain point, right? We are talking about things that are of a sensitive nature and could feel overwhelming to people. So I always offer people, like, push back if things are feeling overwhelming, but it must be very difficult, or at least it was, to talk about the inappropriate actions of the babysitter that Adam had. Yeah, imagine just having that realization. And I mean, what a breakthrough, right? Like that's the power of therapy in one story, right? Oh my gosh. It's like starting afresh. Fresh? Just fresh. Why am I adding an So yeah, thank you so much to Adam. I always think I'm so impressed with people who are able to talk about, some of the worst things in their life. So yeah, thank you so much. Before I get to the weird thing causing me anxiety this week, I just want to remind you of the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's just a way to make a donation. You can find that link in the description. Then there's the Pure Spectrum CBD with the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off. If you want to sign up for grocery delivery, you can do so on the Instacart link that's in the description. And doing it that way tells Instacart that this show sent you there, which helps support the show. And then there's the Cardist Studio, who also offered the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off your initial order. So yeah, supporting the sponsors is a great way to help support the show and to keep these getting made. So thank you to everyone that has been supporting. Okay, so the weird thing causing me anxiety this week, I don't know what's been going on, but I've been seeing a lot of people, it's probably not a trend that's real. It's just because I take Prozac. But I've seen a lot of people taking shots at Prozac and how it supposedly doesn't allow you to feel the full range of emotions. And that makes me nervous to hear, despite knowing that it's not my experience, right? I feel the full range of my emotions every day, but it just helps me. The bottom doesn't drop out, and it puts a ceiling on how anxious I can get. I mean, which is still pretty anxious. So I don't know, but still, you hear this other experience, and it makes you wonder, like, am I doing something? Am I numbing myself? But yeah, I know it's not the story. And before going on it, I could go a couple months without laughing, which is, hearing that sentence said out loud it's tough, right? I mean, because it's a simple thing that should happen every day, at least a little bit. And no one loves my jokes more than me. So yeah, just been kicking that around in my head. But just want to say thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.